Sweet holy sine wave, it's been a minute since we last did one of these. Hey, it's me, Op42, Dan, here to show you how I turned this into this. But first, I have to tell you where I've been. Kinda 2 years ago almost, I kinda stopped streaming because my real world schedule got so busy actually working with real artists on their music. So I've been producing, I've been recording, writing, arranging, mixing, mastering music. Some very, very cool artists who I really have to thank for the opportunities, for putting the trust in me. So that's why it's been a minute. What we have here today is a song by a local metalcore band called Breathelast. And the song is called Ajunge Nimic. It's in Romanian, but it should still work for our purposes here, which is actually, I'm gonna do a track breakdown and show you how I sort of changed it from a metalcore song into a cyberpunk song. I actually worked on the vocal production, arrangement, recording, editing, and mixing for the vocals, just the vocals. The instrumental was all done beforehand and recorded, and then I came in to work with Mihai, who's a fantastic singer, very, very talented, very, very honest in his delivery, and he just gives it his all, really. Like, I mean, the dude is full on blast, 110%. When recording. So that was an amazing experience. The lads actually came to me because I had previously worked with the singer on one of my pet projects, which is The Longest Heartbreak, on a song called Ghost Walking. It kind of sounds like this. So he said, let's work on another song, and I happily took up the opportunity, and really huge thanks to the band and to Mihai for trusting me with this. This was fantastic to work on, and it was very fun. But then, like, the song was done, and I was like, You know, I looked at kind of the tempo, and I was kind of thinking, how would, you know, those vocals sound on a totally different, like in a totally different genre. So I started working on this remix, and I sent some samples to the band, and they were in. They loved it. So I finished it, and we released it, and you can listen to it, and we'll have links everywhere in the description. Maybe something will pop up here. Both the original song, like the super heavy song, is out, as well as my cyberpunk remix is also out everywhere. Again, all links below. And if you enjoy what we're doing here, of course, am I having multiple personality? Heck, am I having a crisis? Am I having an identity crisis? And of course, if you enjoy what I'm doing over here, please leave a like, share, comment, subscribe, whatever you can. Even your view is much appreciated, and I hope that this is helpful for you. So what we're gonna do today is that I'm gonna open up actually the project to see exactly, you know, how I came up with certain sounds, what did I use, what was the intent, what was the production, what was the mix, and I'll take you through everything and try my best to explain everything along the way, and hopefully this will be helpful for you too. I know I love watching these sorts of videos myself, so I'm doing it fully because I'm super passionate and super nerdy about music, so hopefully you're down for that too. Let's jump in. The first thing I want to talk about is actually what was the idea of the song. So from a lyrical standpoint, one of the main themes of the song is that in time you arrive at a place where basically you're kind of happy with nothing. Right? You end up being happy with having nothing. And that idea sort of sparked my imagination, and my first thought went to a dystopia, where, you know, people in time become so used to the fact that they don't have a voice, they don't have any real agency in their lives. The corporations or whomever is in charge, then they're in power, they have all the resources, basically, you know, lives are forfeit and things like that. Really sort of 1984 type stuff. I went to dystopia, then I went to, of course, cyberpunk, because, I mean, I'm a huge sci-fi and cyberpunk fan. I love that stuff. Also recommended watch Indigo Gaming's videos on cyberpunk, on the history of cyberpunk as a genre, and those are very, very cool. But outside of that, the idea with the arrangement. So let's talk a little bit about the structure. I knew I wanted 2 big drops. I knew I wanted one that was super filthy and sort of mid-tempo and cyberpunky and heavy, and you could just like headbang to it. And I knew I wanted one that was even filthier. At first, I didn't want any choruses, but as I worked on the song, and because I'm a bit of a pop head, I did decide that I wanted choruses, and of course I had to do an A chorus and a B chorus. And we'll go through each part, and I'll sort of explain like where my headspace was at for each one. For the intro, I did this sort of basic DJ sort of filter sweep, opening up of the filter basically to lead into the first verse so I can have a big boom and I can start building up towards the first drop. So you can hear that in the intro. So you can hear that basically, well, I'm using some whispers as some extra effects to kind of catch your ear and be like, oh, what's happening there? But what I'm also doing is that I'm sort of saying the name of the song, the title, so that it sticks in your head to start out with, and I am sort of building towards the verse. This isn't the verse yet. This is kind of a build-up to the build-up, if you will. So we arrive at the intro and we start pumping that filtered kick. You're kind of getting ready for the big drop, right? Okay, and then there's the big boom sweep where, okay, we're getting ready to really drop the bass on this one and get like really filthy. This build up, so this is what I heard, so like listening to a lot of EDM, I noticed a trend at one point. If you're doing vocal EDM, you can use the build up towards the first drop as your verse. You can just stick your verse vocals in there and it works fantastically, because what happens is that, you know, I'm listening to the vocals, so I'm getting like what's the message of the song, what is the singer talking about, but also I'm getting that riser going, right? It's making me like really get pumped, right? So I'm using the vocal to lead into my first drop, and it's a really cool effect. I'm really partial to this sort of octave down monster voice. I don't know, man, it tickles me fancy. It does. It really does. And then we go into our first drop, and notice there's 2 things happening on the first drop. So I'm not just going straight into bass, drums, and some synths, but I'm actually still using vocal elements, and I'm using effects, right? You can see over here this green part is the effects, because I still want to keep your attention. I'm not just going to repeat the riff ad nauseum. It feels like it's sort of building towards something. One thing I should really point out right now before we move on is project organization. Now, I'm not very good about this all the times. Actually, I had to clean up this project and make it really nice before I showed it off. But I tend to try to find time to label everything. You see, I have all my sections labeled. Well, why am I pointing at the screen? It's not like you can see my hand on the screen. I have a mouse. You can see I have all my... I need to stop this. This hand just goes here. So I have everything sort of labeled out in my sections over here. They're color coded. I have a system. I have a color coding system for all my parts. You know, like for example, the chorus is red because it's the most important part to me. So it's like it's labeled red. It pops in my head. Oh, in my head, through my eye, it pops. It pop. I need to know that I need to get to the chorus, and then all the rest of the song sort of revolves around that. I've got all my tracks labeled. I know what everything is. So if I open up, for example, over here, you can see I've got like verse vocals, chorus vocals, vocal effects. For synths especially, it's very easy to keep adding synths, and then you don't know what the heck each synth is unless you like listen to it, or you just sort of know it because you've worked on the project enough. But it's still important to label things so that you can move super duper quickly through the project. Label your stuff, color your stuff, organize your project. It's important. Moving on to the chorus. So I need something that I can hum. I need something that can move me, that is catchy, as catchy AF. So what I did is that I went into the first chorus, and then I sort of created out of the post-chorus or a bridge from the original version of the song, I sort of created a second chorus. So here it is going into the first chorus. Which is basically just the first chorus of the actual chorus of the song. But then it goes into the B chorus. So you've got your big woes that you can sing along to, but you've also got lyrics happening, so it doesn't feel like it's just a cheesy big stadium moment. It feels like it's an entire thing that feels to be a part of the song. We then have to go into the bridge. So there's this section in the original song where it's basically kind of like a preaching sort of speech, where actually, if I remember correctly, I asked the singer to take up a vocal mic and just like do big hand gestures, like really oratorial style, if you will. So I was thinking of this part as, you know, what if it were like an underground sort of rebellious bass or something like that, and you know there's this speech going, sort of Independence Day style, where you know the leader of the resistance is like, oh, you know what, we can't take this anymore, and so on and so forth, right? It's a very declarative way of putting lyrics forth. Initially, we did it in the original song as a sort of metalcore sort of speech thing, or hardcore, if you will. You know, there's certain styles of hardcore where it's basically like just spouting lyrics or poetry or just speeches at you, and there's like chugging. Or it's very melodic if it's like something like, I'm thinking maybe early Being as an Ocean, things like that. But I reincorporated that into a sort of dystopian resistance leader speech type vibe. And then it goes back into the verse. So it's basically we're doing the build up towards the second drop again. I also use this opportunity to bring in some of the growls in there because, I mean, Breathelast are an aggressive band, right? And the singer is known for his aggressive vocal style, so I didn't want to necessarily remove that completely. It's not as present on this version as it is on the original version, because I wanted that distinction, and I want the singer to also be known for the fact that he can sing, and he's a beast at it, right? Not just at the harsh vocals, but also at the clean singing. Okay, so what I did there was I created contrast. This is a huge tool that you can use in your own productions, contrast. If you want to make something sound heavier, you could try. So let's say you have an A part and you have a B part, and you want to make the B part really, really effing heavy. You could try to make the B part really heavy. That's one way of doing it. But by creating contrast, by making the A part lighter or leaving a little bit of a gap where nothing happens, when that B part comes in, it just wrecks your soul, right? So this is what I did here. So you can see like everything drops out. My synths, my delays, my reverbs, my everything, it drops out. I get a little TV announcer thing. Then the monster vocal comes in and it feels so huge because there's nothing else happening there. And then it drops, right? And it feels like it's a lot heavier than before, even though it's not. But what I actually do is that I do that, and then later, so I double the drop because we need to have time to really, really mosh around. I double that part, and then I actually make it heavier by introducing a lot more distortion. Not distortion, although that would be a good idea for an effects pedal. the distortion pedal, I guess. And I'm just pushing everything to the limit. Like, you can kind of hear that the mix is sort of, and the master is sort of struggling here, because I'm just pushing so much mid-range and bass and distortion into the song, where it's just like, it feels almost suffocating. And I kind of wanted that. Like, imagine this as being the sort of the climactic moment of a movie, right? It needs to, or the third act, right? Where it's the fight scene and the big fight scenes, and like, you just can't, you can barely sort of follow what's happening, and you're just holding on for dear life. Then we go back into the choruses, right? Give a big old catchy send off. My god, those are some long reverbs. Big ol' war chorus. Whoa. Chorus at the end. And then we just do a bit of a DJ outro thing, where I just leave like 8 bars of outro in case, if you're in a DJ set and you want to transition from this song to another one, you can, by fading out this one, fading in the other one. That would be just a basic example of how these types of transitions work, at least from what I've seen to the DJ shows that I've been to, which are not a lot, admittedly. I need to go to more, honestly. Now, there's one thing you might have noticed. If you were to compare this song to the original song, actually, what I did is that I used the vocals, and a lot of them, but not a lot from the instrumental, and that was a purposeful thing. So I'm really interested these days in experimenting with taking singers and putting them in context where you're not used to hearing them, and taking bands and putting them in context where you didn't really expect to hear them in that world. Because Breathelast are such an experimental band, where actually they have acoustic songs, they had remixes before, they had, heavy songs, light songs, jazzy songs, featured. They're a band that's been around, right, for a while. I wanted to do a totally different take on all of that. I wanted to say, okay, look, I'm gonna mess with the vocals, I'm gonna mess with the structure of the song, and I'm gonna take you guys to a place that you've never been to, right? I'm gonna take you to Blade Runner 2049, or I'm gonna take you to Neuromancer Town, I'm gonna take you to Cowboy Bebop Land, I'm gonna take you to Ghost in the Shell Town, right? And it's gonna be a fun time, because it's gonna be new, and it's basically kind of, if I were to rewrite the song in a different genre, that would be the best way to put it. I mean, it's more of a reimagining than a remix per se, but I feel that it worked out really well, and I'm really, really thankful for the band for letting me to experiment and really go nuts. I mean, bless them, bless their hearts, they have given me free reign to go totally nuts with the song, and I did. So let's get started with the drums. I've got one kick that's going on the verse. Which is just the build-up kick. I'm not really doing anything with it. All I'm doing is I'm fading it in for the second verse, and that's kind of it. Then my main kick sound is actually 2 samples. So first up we have this bad boy. So what I did is I combined a very electronic kick sound, this one, with a more natural kick sound. And I did this purposefully because I wanted to mix in sort of real drums, quote unquote, with actual electronic drums. The electronic one gives me the exact precision on the low end and the slap that I want on the kick, while the real one, the roomier one, gives the kick space and air and a place to live. And they hit very, very nicely together. For the snare, I've got again a very electronic sound combined with a more straightforward 80s style, very noisy snare. but it's also combined with a real snare room sample. Which is actually coming from the GGD Modern and Massive library. Chair squeak. It's the Ludwig Supraphonic brass snare. And together, like if you put these together, right, gives it a very reverby sort of sound. I've also got some drum reverb going in parallel, using the Verb Suite Classics with, of course, I'm using the BM7, which I think is the Bricasti emulation, and it sounds just fantastic as a drum plate. I've got a little hay going on here, which is actually from a Joey Sturgis pack, if I'm not mistaken, where it's basically these big sort of metalcore, hardcore gang vocals. But if you put all these elements together, it sounds like a drum kit, right? And this is one of the things that I like to do. I like to layer elements together because it gives them a bit of a more unique character, even though I still like to keep most of the original sound and tones there because I liked them, right? And that's why I chose them. Build up claps and drum fills. We've got real cymbals, again from the Modern and Massive pack, that I'm layering into the hi-hats, atmospheric crashes. I've even got a reverse crash happening here to sort of create a wash of cymbals, especially on the drop and the choruses. It needs to feel big. It wouldn't be a chorus that I worked on without some shakers, tambourines, and super tambourines, which kind of sound like this. And what I'm using these for is to create a sort of a counterpoint on the cymbals to the very straight and narrow sort of four on the floor kick and snare pattern, right? And of course, we've got to have our big 80s Phil Collins style toms. Literally did the Phil Collins fill because you cannot. And if we were to solo the drums, it kind of sound like this. Yeah. The drums don't really do anything too wacky or too surprising. They just do their job. Now, to talk a little bit about the mixing, it's pretty straightforward. There isn't any wackiness. Like my kicks, I'm just EQing them a little bit. I like a very scooped kick, as you can notice. Let me actually make this. There we go. This is my EQ for the kick. It's very scooped, at least for the first kick sound. With it, it feels like a lot of mid-forward. It feels very mid-forward, but I want it scooped because I know I'm gonna come in with some mids on that kick from the more real / airy room sound, which is this one. Which I'm actually now realizing that I actually triggered. Okay, so in here I see I'm using some, I think these are still from the Modern and Massive pack. I think these are the Tama Binga ones. Yeah, they seem to be. I've got some of the direct mics in here, but I mean, I'm mostly using it for the rooms. And then I'm EQing it. Actually, I'm EQing it exactly as I am for the other kick. But I mean, I've got some mids from this one, I've got some mids from the other one, and they build up. But I actually wanted it to have a lot of presence and a lot of like high-end content, a lot of sub-content. And of course, I'm distorting it with JST clip, because you gotta. It is the law. For the snare, what I'm doing is that I'm doing some pretty aggressive EQing, I have to say. for this one, because all I wanted was this mid bop to it, because I wanted it to contend with the riff synths, because the synths on the drop are very mid heavy, but I duck them when I come in with the snare, of course. So because of that, I wanted the snare to still kind of live in that place a little bit and contend with those. For the other snare layer, you see I'm doing a bit of a more traditional sort of mid-scooped, 200 boosted sort of sound to it, distorting the crap out of it. And then just, I had a lot of these, so these over-processed EDM based on classic drum machine sort of snares have a lot of high-end content, and it gets very, very harsh up there, so I needed to kill that. Yeah. I wanted to just calm it down, and I'm layering this with the snare room sample, which, because this is an actual recording of an actual drummer hitting an actual drum, even though it is a VST, it needs a lot more work. So like if I were to just show you with processing and without, this is what it sounds like, right? It cannot hold a candle to the way it needs to sound in the mix. With processing, so I'm going to show you without and with, but without talking in between, hopefully. Because I knew most of my high end was coming from this sample, this is why I kind of cut a lot of the high end from the other snares. And I'm not doing anything fancy here. I'm just EQing a little bit, taking out a little bit of the extreme low end, boosting the presence on it, and compressing the ever-living crap out of it. So let me show you step by step, actually. Without, with. This gives me a lot of the sound that I need. And then I just do cleanup work. Taking out the extreme low end. I thought I felt like it needed another boost on the low end, but actually it didn't. It was like totally killing the mix. Then I gated it. I set the gate to where it actually closes just a little bit before the next hit, because that way it triggers my entire sort of mix chain and mastering chain, because there's that little gap there. Then I did some more compression. Interesting. This is actually something pretty wacky that I did. So what's happening is that for some reason on this sample, the way it's triggering for some reason, there's a lot more on the right side than there is on the left side. So it made the snare sort of feel decentered, which I didn't really like for this mix. In some mixes, it can be a cool thing, because if you layer just a little bit, it can feel like the snare is more stereo, but I just wanted to focus the snare in the middle to hit you really hard, right? Speaking of hitting very hard, I actually took out some of the attack and added more sustain to the snare room sample, because I'm getting most of my attack from the main snare sounds. Yeah, and you feel it sort of dip a little bit when it first hits, and then I just gained it. I try to keep my faders at 0 as much as possible, and just gain on the use gain plugins. This is a little nolly thing that I picked up from him as a workflow thing, and it actually really, really helped. All I'm doing on the group is just distorting some more. Just a little bit to kind of contain those transients a little bit, make the drums feel less pokey. So for the drum fill here, what I'm doing is I'm panning it and sort of taking down the volume. It initially sounded like this. It sounds pretty gnarly, But what I did is I boosted the attack because it had a lot of sustain and a lot of reverb added to it to kind of clean it up. Then I high passed and low passed it because I wanted what's after it, the drop, to hit harder. Then distorted it some more. And then just gained it. My god, that probably was pretty loud. I should have left that gain plugin. What other cool sounds? There's a build-up clap. It's a clap. It doesn't do anything. And for the reversed atmosphere, I didn't do anything. Like it's just a little sample that I reversed and faded. That's the drums. Bass. So, you know what's better than one bass? 4 basses. So this is just a little bass that I use to get us pumping right before the drop. And if I'm not mistaken, it's actually the same patch that I'm using as my main bass sound. The hissy hitter, if you will. So I'm using Anna 2 for a lot of my sound design and synth work, yep. Because I paid for it, right? So there's a lot of good stuff that is actually pretty usable right out the box, but also it allows me to layer things properly. And look at that little volume over there. Oh, you're so cute. I'm sure there's nothing wrong with the fact that I pause exactly on this little volume. So I use Anna 2. It's included with the Slate bundle that I'm using and that I absolutely love. There's a lot of usable sounds in there, and it's very great for getting like ideas really quickly up, and for then, you know, messing around with the sounds and layering stuff. My main bass sound is this one. So let me see if I'm doing anything to it. I'm just doing EQ, where I'm just sort of containing the extreme low end, because we're gonna stack 4 basses together, so you don't want that building up too much. But this is my main bass sound. And I absolutely loved it, right? Because I was like, okay, this is giving most of the character that I'm looking for. It has that cyberpunky feel. But, of course, I needed more. So this is just like a little grainy, just messy bass that is sort of adding more bass. Because when you add a bass and then add another bass, you get more bass. Bass. Okay. And then I had to use 2 of my favorite sounds, actually. It's this fat sort of Juno bass sound. It just takes me directly to synthwave cyberpunk town. And then there is, of course, the Prophet bass sound, where it's... I just love the sound of it. Again, it already takes you to cyberpunk synthwave town, but if we layer these together, right, and they're layered, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, in different volumes, and you can see like how low I'm sending these to the group. I need to be very, very careful, because these will build up. They'll build up a lot of low frequencies, a lot of mud, and we need to be very, very careful. The very cool thing is that if you put the bass together with the drums, they work out really well. Again, they have a lot of the character that I'm looking for, and I see that I actually didn't do a lot to them. So what do we have here? I'll leave the limiter on, and I'll explain it afterwards, but let's see with and without this this chain. So all I really wanted out of the bass was more presence, right? Just more bite to it, because that's what I boosted over here. I'm compressing it a little bit just to keep it under control and tame some of the peaks. But I mean, it's an electronic bass sound. It's gonna be pretty consistent, I would imagine. And I'm actually boosting a little bit of the 100 to kind of really force it in a spot where I'm comfortable with it. And that's kind of basically it. Then I'm setting it to a limiter. I'm using the L2 here because I actually did not have the L1 bought. So I kept using the L2 on my tracks and groups, which, I mean, it got the job done. And really all it's doing here, it's just keeping the bass in place. It's not moving, it's not going anywhere, and it's actually taming a lot of that excess low end. Also, what I'm doing that's very, very important is, of course, I'm ducking the volume of the bass every time the kick and the snare hit, at least in terms of main hits. I think for the in-between hits, the ba-dum-ba thing, I didn't actually duck there because I just wanted like the main bounce of it. If I were to stop this, and I'll show you with and without, if I were to stop this automation that I'm doing over here, you'll hear that the kick and the snare kind of get lost because the bass is going to be eating a lot of that and it won't have the same punch. Then we have the synths. There's not actually a lot happening on the synths. Let's look at each one of these. So for the chorus, we have some vocal leads that are sort of doubling the woes on the vocals. And you can see, like, I'm ducking the volume again where the kick and the snare hit. And it's creating this sort of counterpoint to the kick and the snare, giving it that bounce. That's really giving me a very cool atmosphere. And basically these are, I think, Ana 2s again that I'm starting from. Yep, Parunis. And I'm not doing too much to them, so I'm adding more reverb because, and by the way, this plugin is free. Like, if you don't have it, seriously get it. It's amazing, really. And my favorite setting on it is the splashy synth, and then I just mess with like the mix, which, oh my god, I left pretty freaking high. I mess with the mix and the delay and the feedback and maybe the warping and stuff like that to kind of customize to what you're looking for. And then I just gained it, and that's it. And for the other one, I'm doing kind of the same thing so that they match in tone. One thing that really makes the bass pop in that drop is the riff synth that I have on top. So what this is, it's a pluck sound that I'm sending into some extreme distortion. Then I'm using the tape to sort of smooth out the distortion. I noticed that if you try to use this tape emulation plugin on a very heavily distorted synth sound, it actually makes it sound a bit more natural for some reason. And then gained it. And then, so that's for the first sound for this one. But I also got this one. And this one is straight up into Misha Mansour's ToneForge amp plugin. I'm using the GGD Cali oversized cabs for it. Then I'm using tape to smooth it out, gain, and then just a bit of widening to make it sound like pretty much like a rhythm guitar. I mean, it sounds like a rhythm guitar, that's what it does. But the cool thing is, so let me solo out the drums with just the bass. And then I'll bring in the riff synth halfway through so you can see what it's adding. This just gives the bass that huge mid push to where it feels really, really gnarly and distorted. I've got a little pluck sound. That I'm using on the verse. And I'm also using in the build-up. And this is what I call theming, because I have the build-up synth, this little theme happening on the verse, and then I'm referencing it on the drop. And thus it feels like the song is together. And it also gives a bit of melody to the aggressive destroy your face riff. Before I move to the chorus lead, let me show you the amp 2. So this is just ridiculous. So it's a synth called it's a patch called Heavyweight. I don't know if we can actually hear it without any effects. But basically, so there's 3 octaves stacked, I think. Yeah, there's 3 octaves stacked. It's very, very sub-heavy, very, very bassy. And I engage the slide on Ana 2. So what it does is then it slides from note to note, giving it that really wow character to it. That's the scientific explanation. I can't get more technical than that. What I'm doing then is that I'm sending it to the amp, using again my GGD cabs, smoothing it out with tape, EQing it. It's very gnarly without the EQ. Like, it has a lot of high-end harshness, a lot of low-end content, because it's a sub, right? It's basically a sub. Then widening it and gaining it to an appropriate level, and it sounds like this. On its own, it sounds gnarly enough, but when you layer it with the bass and the other layers of the riff synth, because it's happening there too, and the drums, it takes you to the next level of heaviness. Exactly what I was saying in the intro. That is redonkulous, honestly. Now for the chorus lead. So we went into a melodic chorus, and I couldn't resist. At first, I didn't want to put in some really cheesy synth wavy leads, but I just couldn't resist the temptation. The idea with the song here is that this is the chorus where he says, oh, we're basically like satisfied with nothing. So I went with the idea of making it kind of cheery, like that would be the message from the I don't know, dystopian overlords, right? That you should be happy with nothing. So let's be happy and do a little dance. So I went with these really sort of almost tropical sounding, I don't know, summery, vibey things, tones, synths, really, maybe lo-fi or something like that. Yeah, and all I did was just add a ton of delay to them, a ton of shimmer reverb to them, and then just gain them and EQ the excessive low end and just duck them when the drums hit. And I do this a lot. I create a sort of a secondary top line, if you will. Your first top line, and the top line is basically like the melody that's on top of the song. And I like to create a secondary top line to that, so to the vocals, a sort of a melodic counterpoint or a melodic response that is actually going constantly. That way it doesn't distract from the vocals, but it adds that little bit of catchiness to it, where even if you're not really into the vocals, for example, maybe you could be hooked by this melody here. Or even if you are into the vocals, you could be like, oh, you know, when I re-listened to it, oh, I discovered this little thing and it's super catchy and now I can't get it out of my head. It's simple but effective. For the pads, what I'm using is a little choir sound that's actually from a free pack. It's called the Luminous Choir, and it's from the Sam Free Orchestra, and it sounds like this. I'm using it on the chorus and a little bit to get into the... do a little transition before the intro. On the intro, I have two pads. I have a normal pad. It's just a pad sound. What I do for my pad sounds is that I usually go for, I choose like a keyboard tone that I like, a synth tone that I like really. Add a crap ton of Valhalla shimmer to it, EQ it, gate it, or transgate it even, which is what I did here. And Bob's your uncle. There you have, you kind of have your own sort of unique spin or that's my at least sort of semi-unique spin on pad synths. And you can see that my Transgate plugin over here is going in the pattern that we're gonna have on the drop, because I'm preparing it, right? Not only with the little synth melody that we talked about earlier, aka, but also with this little trance pad that's gonna give you subconsciously, okay, this rhythm is gonna come up and we're gonna go nuts. On the chorus for my pads, what I'm using, so I've got that choir, and I've also got another pad going on the B chorus with the woes. Nothing too fancy here, just again a ton of reverb and a little filter to take out the extreme high end, which would have been I mean, I like it actually, but I wanted to leave more high end for the vocals in there. Now, if I were to solo out just the synths on this chorus, which I often tend to like to do, for little ear candy effects, let's actually solve these out. There's not a lot happening. You've got your risers. And I'm actually using that reverb tail. Usually you'd cut it out, but I'm actually using it. You got your booms, your and I'm using a lot of shimmer on these to kind of go away, filter. And I'm using a lot of shimmer on these to give them more space. I have these little sort of slightly industrial hits happening, and these basically need to work in tandem with the drums. On their own, they don't sound like much. They're like, okay. And there's really not a lot to them. There's a bit of distortion here and there. There's this knocking here with a little bit of reverb. But if you hear them in context with the drums, just to give it a bit more industrial flair to it, if you will. I am a big fan of industrial music. I grew up on it. I'm a huge Nine Inch Nails fan, so I had to, right? I had to. The Fragile, favorite album, by the way. Doing these effects, you basically just plop them in the project outright, and then you just tweak them where you need to. For example, this extra drum, this little knocking that kind of sounds like somebody's... kind of like that. No, it kind of sounds like somebody is knocking on your door or something like that. It sounded like this. So it's kind of like a clap snare. A snare that caught the clap, if you will. I added this little Roomworks to give it kind of some distance and make it feel like it's coming from behind you. Then filtered out most of the high end to make it sound muffled, and then just gained it, and then just cut out some of the mud in the low end to not interfere with our bass, our kick, right, and our drums, and that's kind of basically it. Let's do the vocals. Let's start out with the main vocals. And let me show you my vocal chain for this song. I customize it depending on the singer, depending on the song, even depending on the mood, if you will. First up, I have Metatune on, right? And I'm just like tuning the vocal, which is fine. It's really going all over the place because it's trying to contain the distorted sort of vocals, because the singer has a very fry quality to his voice, where he sings, like, even when he sings cleanly, it's pretty aggressive. We then have some preliminary EQ, taking out some of the mud, adding some high end. And then for the meat and potatoes of the vocal chain, right? The trimmer is just setting my level before I hit the compressors and the saturation. First step is that we have distortion, so basically preamp saturation, if you will. Just makes it brighter and more upfront. I really like this Hollywood one because it sounds vintage, but it doesn't kill like the sort of the modern high frequencies that you kind of want in your vocals. The other models, like the New York one, is too transparent. It almost feels digital. It feels like 80s style, if you will. And I will use the New York one on maybe, I don't know, an orchestra or something like that if I want something a bit more transparent. The London one feels to me like it's very warm, so it's very like, it has a lot of low end to it, and it has a lot of character to it, and sometimes it kind of kills that modern sound if I'm going for that. So I might use that if I have something that's very distorted and very digital sounding. I might go with that one. Then I'm using a compressor that I think is working pretty hard. And I use the black 1176 modeler because because I wanted it to be slightly slower than the blue one. The blue one seems like, the modern one seems very, very fast. Yeah, this is the one, the 11.6. Right, the 1176 black modeler is sort of an in-between, while the vintage one is the slowest. I did want it to be fast, but I wanted a little bit of slowness in there because I wanted it to hit a bit slower, to have a bit more transient in there, a bit more bite to the vocal. But then, of course, I'm using the LA2A limiter in compress mode, actually, to smooth it out even more. So I'm getting kind of the best of both worlds, right? So I'm getting like the attack and the bite and the sound of a compressed vocal, but very, very aggressive from the 1176, and I'm getting the smoothed out, blocky, no dynamics sort of vibe from the LA2A. And then I'm just using the de-esser. And yes, I know the rule that you should de-ess before you compress. Sometimes I do that, sometimes I do it the other way around. It really depends on the way it sounds. Knowing that I was going to compress really, really heavily and very, very aggressively, I wanted the de-esser after the compression because I wanted it to work pretty hard to kind of add to the aggressive sound of the vocals. It's almost like every part of the chain is sort of struggling to keep up with the intensity of the vocal. That was the idea I was trying to go for. And then I have this little filter thing that I'm using here. What am I doing here? So I'm using this when I'm transitioning from chorus A to chorus B. Or I'm not? No, I'm just using it here. Oh, right. Right, so I'm using this filter just on the intro because I want to distinguish it from the verse vocal. And that's pretty much the chain that I'm going for across the board. Unless I'm doing sort of little effects like here where I'm doing a lo-fi effect. Okay, and I think I'm doing another one here. But these two are overlapping, so I didn't want to deal with that. basically. So I just copy pasted and created another track and duplicated the track. Now, what I'm doing for the parallel effects, I'm going to exemplify this using the chorus vocal over here. Okay, and I'm going to open this up. I'm going to show you what each one is doing, and then I'm going to show you what effects I used there. Okay, then we've got this lad. So those were the telephone slap, the white guy, the long delay, and now we're gonna hear the reverb. And all three of them together sound like this. Overall, I'm using a lot of effect, right? It's a pretty reverby, effecty sort of vocal. So the telephone slap is actually this Murder Melodies plugin, which is very, very cool. It has a lot of modes, and I'm just using the reverse on it to create a reverse delay effect, sending that into my delay at full blast, full 100% mix, then so that it gives out this sort of delayed reverse delay effect. Then I'm using the London preamp, which is again kind of sort of 60s style to distort it into a big ass reverb, and then lo-fiing it so that it sounds. Yeah, you can sort of hear it happening in the back end. For the wide guy, I'm actually doing an octave down with a bit of reverb, high pass and low pass, and some widening, because it is called the wide guy. So this is like the wide guy Mihai, if you will. Yeah, so it sounds like that. It's kind of like a room plate, but like with a low octave monster voice. The long delay, it's just a quarter note ping pong delay, slapback delay, if you will. And the reverb is just, well, a reverb. But it does have some high passing and low passing just because we don't want it to mess with the vocal. And that's the effect stack for the vocals. It's nothing too revolutionary, but it gets the job done, and it sounds pretty cool if I do this myself. Let's talk about vocal arrangement, because this is where the fun begins. I've got main vocal up the center, and in the chorus we have our little doubles happening, so let's just hear the main vocals, if you will. In the backing vocals, so we've got a little vocal harmony stack. Now, I didn't use the entire vocal stack, I just used a main harmony and a main high octave. And I'm pretty much using the same vocal chain, but I'm hitting the tuning harder. So this is an electronic song, so instead of your sort of transparent tuning effect that you might have on a rock song or a metal song. Yeah, spoiler kids, your favorite metal bands use autotune. Everybody uses autotune, it's fine. Nobody died. And you still love the songs. Hitting the tuning a lot harder because it's an electronic song and I can get away with that, and I honestly just like the sound of it. I'm used to it. I grew up with this sound, technically speaking, we all did. And then I'm using these huge ass gang vocals. Same vocal chain, same vocal chain. Effects vocals. First up, we've got some whisper vocals that basically, if I were to turn these on and show you, what these do is this. So what I'm doing is I'm doing a pitch shift down, but I'm combining the dry signal in there so that it gives that sort of ethereal quality to them. Sounds a bit creepier that way. Then what I'm doing is I'm taking out some of the low end, adding some brightness to them. Yeah. Then doing the same, pretty much the same, oh my god. Okay. Then pretty much doing the same vocal chain, and then just lo-fiing them. That's all it is. I've got a little reverse reverb vocal where I basically took the beginnings of the vocal. So like literally like the first two or the first syllable or the first two syllables or something like that. Cut it up, EQ'd as I did for the main vocal. Used the same vocal chain, but just added a crap ton of reverb to them, full blast. After I did that, I bounced it and then basically just reversed it and cut it up, added some widening to it, did some basic EQ moves. And there you go. We've got vocoder vocals. Tuning, but then what I'm using is actually the Tim Henson multi-voicer pedal, and this is basically where the vocoding effect is coming from. But because the vocals have some grit to them, the vocoder is sort of struggling to pinpoint exactly the notes and stuff like that, so it's giving this sort of weird quality to it. To where it feels like the vocoder is broken, and I'm into that. Same vocal chain as before, into some extra reverb, a trance gate because that's only at 50% because it then makes it sound like a trancey synth. Basically what this does is that it binds the vocoder with the trance pad that we're using here. The monster vocal is pretty simple. All I'm doing is that I'm using Graillon to Graillon 2. Just pitch it down, and I'm preserving the formants, but just up to a point. But of course that I couldn't leave it at that, so I've actually got a fair bit of automation on it. After I'm pitch shifting it down, I'm using the same vocal chain. Then I'm using a bit crusher to get that sort of disintegration effect, that sort of Mr. Stark I don't feel so well effect as the vocal goes on. I'm then using Isotope Trash to distort it even more because I was like, you know what, this needs more distortion. It's just too clean. Yeah, boy. And then just taking out some of the extreme high end and extreme low end because it was a bit too overbearing, yeah, in the mix. Instead of putting a trance gate on the vocal, which is kind of what I wanted to do, sometimes some plugins, when you bypass them on and off, sometimes they have like an audible click or pop or lag to them. So what I did was I said, never mind, I'll make my own trance gate with blackjack and hookers. And so I have this little bit of volume automation here. And then I just boost the volume going into my effects sends and that's the final effect. I'm using the vocoder on the chorus, of course, as well. Just because what I did was that I changed the chord progressions on the song. So the original vocal was thought in the context of an original chord progression, which is fine. But if I want to force it a little bit more to fit into my chord progression that I want to try out here, I sometimes put a vocoder in there just to generate some backing vocals, some additional backing vocals that sort of bind the backing vocals that we have and the main vocal to my new chord progression. It's a bit of a subtle trick, but I find that it's pretty helpful. We have these little vocal hooks in here. Alvin! Okay, so this is just a lo-fi effect on that little vocal hook that he sings in there, with some extra reverb and this little octave up, just to give it a bit more brightness, make it stand out a little bit more, so that it's super duper catchy. It's super duper catchy. One more effect that I really want to talk about here. I think this is the one. So this is basically an old TV announcer, Romanian TV announcer, saying good evening and welcome to the whatever newscast something. What I did is that I did my vocal chain on it, usual vocal chain, but that made it sound like, which is fine, but then I added distortion to it. Makes it super duper nasty. Took out some of the extreme high-end fizz because of the distortion. And then I added just more brightness to it because I needed it to cut through the mix. In the lyrics, the singer says, we don't have a... Exactly in this spot, what he says is, we don't have a voice. Well, yes, we don't have a voice because they have a voice. The overlords, the dystopian corporations, whatever. They control the media that is fed to us in this dystopia, right? So that's why I wanted to have that in there. I really wanted to have in there. And it serves as a bit of a fake out, because you're kind of expecting this drop to come in exactly as you know it, because you know it's being prepared by the build-up, which is pretty similar. That's kind of the vibe. That is kind of the vibe that I was trying to go for there. As a guitar player, sometimes I can be tricked into thinking that the riff is enough. But adding in vocals to your riffs, even if you think, oh, this is just an instrumental part, we're just gonna riff for a bit, okay. But try experimenting with adding actual vocals on that part and see where it gets you. In my case, it made the riff not just be boring, like just plodding, especially in this case where it's pretty repetitive. And it makes the heavy part, the heavier part of the drop just hit that much harder. At the end here, what I did was I sort of referenced the intro with these whispers that start off the song, and then I brought this final scream that is kind of used on the original to bring it back home that this is a reinterpretation of an original song. And yeah, I don't know, it just felt good. And I just want to like solo out the vocals a little bit on that chorus. Ajunge Nimic, just absolutely fantastic vocal performance by the singer of this band. The band is Breathelast, by the way. I know I mentioned that, but if you've made it this far into the video, first off, thank you. But also, I wanted to give them a shout out again because just fantastic lads. As a final thing on the vocal group, what I'm doing is that I'm just setting my level again before I hit this compressor. And let me show you on the vocal chorus over here. Let me just slot the vocals. Let me turn this off, and I'm just doing a, so like after the chain that I'm about to show you, I'm going to EQ a little bit of the mud in the low end. So I have a trimmer just setting my level, then I'm going into an EQ that really all it's doing is just another high pass, and then I'm hitting this FG Dynamics compressor, which is basically an SSL compressor. And I think I used this just because it recently came out when I worked on this song, and I was, fine, let's see what all the hype is about. It's pretty much not doing anything. I mean, honestly, it's not doing just a little bit, just to tame some of the peaks, but not that much. I mean, all it's doing really, it's sort of accentuating the transients, if anything. Then just more brightness. You just gotta have more brightness. I mean, honestly, fresh air is more of a secret weapon than anything else, because I mean, fresh air is pretty much of a secret weapon, if nothing else. I mean, it just boosts your high end so wonderfully. It gives you that polished, modern, produced vibe to your vocals. It just works. Then all I'm doing is I kind of felt like the vocals were a bit too harsh in the higher frequency spectrum, and there was just too much sibilance and things like that, so I wanted to tame that a little bit. Not doing a whole lot, but just to tame it a little bit so that it's a bit cleaner, and then just made it louder, and then sent the vocals into the master bus. For mastering, I'm going to turn off everything except the trimmer and the limiter. Hopefully this is okay. So this is kind of pretty close to how a mixed song sounds. You can hear that mastering is not going to do a whole lot to it to where it's going to change the whole character of the song. It's going to tighten some things up, it's going to clean up some stuff, it's going to boost some stuff, but pretty much the sound is kind of all there. So first things first, I'm just boosting a little bit of the high end and a little bit of the low end on this FGN Neve style EQ, and driving the line on the console a little bit to give me some saturation. You can hear, like, once I usually I usually do this chain with the with these plugins and like a compressor and like a limiter before I actually start mixing. And when you're doing that on just raw tracks, it's kind of hard to hear the difference. That's why my ears need to be fresh for that. But when you do it here on the full mix, where everything is kind of mixed, the difference really is dramatic. When we turn this on, we get our brightness, the track comes alive, you get even a bit of stereo width. It's pretty killer. But that's not enough. I wanted more brightness out of it. Which makes it pretty harsh. Too harsh, you might say. Then I'm using a bus compressor. Just to tame things a little bit and duck everything when the snare hits. I like my snares big, I like my snares in your face, I like my snare to be loud AF. A bit of tape to smooth things over. The tape also acts as a leveler, a level setter, if you will. Before I hit my next chain, I'm gonna leave the trimmer. It's just a smidge, making things quieter. So this is a bit of a trick. really. I mean, I've done this thing so many times to where it's just part of the way I mix and master, but it's really not necessarily the proper way of doing it. It's time to go to mixing jail. So, what I do is that I make the mix super bright up to this point, and maybe with not enough low end. So what I do is then I dull with these EQs, I dull the high end a little bit and I boost the low end. Forgive me for I have synthed. This gets me pretty close to where I want to be, but then I use Revival just for that little extra smidge of just more low end, more brightness. Just make it sound more like a smile shape, if you will, and like dull those mid. I basically dull the mids a little bit by making the high end and the low end louder. Adds dimensionality, and to me this adds more dimensionality to the mix and just makes it pop. And then once again I was trying out this FG Dynamics compressor on the mix bus punch setting, which I mean seemed to do the trick for me. I kind of like it just as popping it in there just to get a bit more pumping out of my mix and master. Just gets me more transient on the kick and the snare, especially when you have these 4 on the floor big ass mixes. It works. And then what I do is to kind of glue it together, add a bit more saturation, the virtual mix bus set on the, I think this is an SSL, I think it's from the 80s, sounds pretty good. So what I did with up to this point was just exaggerate things, exaggerate the transients, exaggerate the high end, the low end. And what I'm doing with this is I'm just bringing it back to an acceptable level, making it feel together, making it feel tighter, if you will. But what it does do is that it makes my stereo feel like it makes it a bit more mono instead of stereo. I usually apply some widening, and with this what I do is that I play around with it in different sections. So you'll hear it going from the drop to the chorus, and you'll see it too, that the widening actually happens and the chorus feels a lot bigger than the drop. Just a touch, just a smidge is a big difference. This sort of refocuses things, makes them wide, and it's loud. And then I hit my limiter, and everything is at 12 o'clock for this mix. I'm hitting the ITB pretty hard, and that's a lot of gain I'm pushing into there, to be honest. But, I mean, it sounds pretty darn good. I do quite enjoy a loud mix. Alright, and that's the video. Thank you so much for staying through the whole thing and watching this whole video. I don't know, man, I just love nerding out about music and sharing this stuff with people. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found something helpful. If you want to subscribe, please do so. I'll be posting more content and going into more deep dives and making some more music on this channel. So catch you in the next one. Stay happy, stay safe, and stay loved. Cheers. Bye.